This is an Irreverent podcast. Check out irreverent.fm for shows from all our friends.
1 Corinthians warned you about the women with a loud mouth, and this podcast is just that. Here at the Speaking in Church podcast, we talk all about the regular people and the things that regularly happen to them in the evangelical church. It's a podcast about change, it's a podcast about seeking moral high ground, and it's a podcast for people who are just trying to deconstruct on the safe side. You can listen wherever you get your podcast, and if you want to be a guest, yes, you, regular person, you can be a guest on the Speaking in Church podcast. If you want to come on, just let us know.
Hello and welcome to Evangelical, a show exploring the world inside and outside the evangelical subculture. I'm your host, Blake Chastain. Today's guest is Scott Okamoto, author of the book Asian American Apostate, Losing Religion and Finding Myself at an Evangelical University. Scott and I are friends. We last spoke on the podcast in 2021. He's also the host of the Chapel Probation podcast, which I have been a guest on as well. And I really loved his book and provided a blurb for it. If you went to a Christian college, you are going to really enjoy this book from a faculty person's perspective. He talks about the ways in which his classroom experiences, that we get into it in the interview, but so much of it is built around that classroom experience at a Christian college and all the other things that happen around it, as well as his experience as an Asian American man in a broadly white place. We talk about all of that and much more in this interview, which we'll get right to. As always, you can support this show via a subscription to my newsletter at the Post-Evangelical Post. You can find that on Substack or at postevangelicalpost.com. You can subscribe for free, or you can upgrade to a paid subscription at $5 a month or $50 a year and get ad-free podcast feeds, exclusive writing, things like that. If you want to support the show in other ways, you can also go over to postevangelicalpost.com/support. You can also find links to Scott's book and many of the other books from the many authors who've been on this show over at bookshop.org. That helps support independent bookstores and helps support this show via my affiliate bookshop there. Other things, you can buy merch. All those other things you can find over at postevangelicalpost.com/support. And finally, if you want to rate and review the show, that still does help even in this day and age, this late stage of podcasting. Thank you very much. Let's get to the interview. Hello, welcome back to Evangelical. My guest today is Scott Okamoto, author of the new book Asian American Apostate, Losing Religion and Finding Myself at an Evangelical University. Scott is also the host of the Chapel Probation podcast. Scott, welcome back to the show.
It's great to be back. I remember you closed out, I think it was 2021, having me on, and we just sort of chatted about, the year and all the things we were going to do.
Yep. And now...
and we did them all, so Here we are.
That's right. Congratulations on the publication of your book. I'm really thrilled to talk to you about it. My own time sort of at an evangelical college as a student was so incredibly formative in a number of ways.
Which you talked about on Chapel Probation.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, and we'll definitely add all those prior conversations into the show notes so that you can have the entire scope of...
Yeah, so you can catch up.
That's
we
right.
should give people a minute to go back and listen. We'll just wait here.
Hit pause. Well,
Pause.
Okay, great. Okay, resume.
We're back.
We're back. It was really eye-opening to see these sort of struggles from the perspective of someone on faculty. But before we get to your time as faculty, which is the majority of your book, I want to rewind the clock a little bit first into your story, because you actually went to a secular school, UC San Diego, for undergrad. So what was that? I mean, that's just a completely foreign experience to me. What was that like? And then what brought you to what you call in the book EVU, for Evangelical University?
Yeah, and I don't if we can use the real name if you want. I just did that as an olive branch for APU. But
Okay.
yeah, well, I grew up, a very strong Christian, and feeling like if I wasn't going to be a pastor or a missionary or something, I should go out into the quote unquote real world. And I had good grades and did okay on the SAT. I'm not very good at math. That really hurt. Um, and so I got into UC San Diego, which was an up and coming school at the time. I wouldn't be able to get in now. There's smart kids going to those schools now. Um, but I saw it as, me Christian going out into the world to, I don't know, do what we do, proselytize, save
Mhm.
it, redeem it, all these horrible colonizer kind of mentality of, I'm gonna go and, make a mark for Jesus. And so it never even occurred to me to apply to a Christian school. Um, in my youth, I felt like it would have been like the easy way to go to a Christian school. So I was gonna really test my faith and go to this big secular science school. I did
Mhm.
join InterVarsity Christian Fellowship while there, so I kind of had the church vibe. It still, we had meetings. I led worship. I led Bible studies. We planned events to evangelize to the campus. So there was plenty of cringeworthy Christian stuff going on, but I did get a very good education, even when I switched to an English major. Um,
Mhm.
I got to hang out with, Toni Morrison came and visited. So I had experiences at that school that you would never have at a Christian school. Nobel laureates giving talks on campus, politicians coming to give talks. So yeah, I really valued it even as a Christian because I felt like, well, we have to be in the world but not of it. But I'm gonna be in it, and I'm gonna understand it and how it works. So at the time, so I
Mhm.
could better evangelize to it. But really, it ended up just being an interesting component of my own deconstruction because I saw, a bigger world than I ever imagined when I was a Christian.
Mhm. Mhm. Could you talk about that a little bit about because it seemed like it was sort of the quality of your classes that really expanded that beyond what you may have assumed, going into an undergrad, and again, as you said, that sort of, um, condescending sort of point of view that a lot of Christians have that, like, they're gonna benefit from my presence here,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, it only took a couple weeks before me to be humbled in so many ways when, professors knew the Bible better than I did. I even had like suite mates who were like party animals who knew the Bible better than I did. It
Mhm.
was super humbling in one sense, but also it was like no pain, no gain, man. I'm being humbled and I'm gonna grow from this, and I'm just gonna read up more. And I read apologetics and Bible concordances and dictionaries to try and figure stuff out you know that I did my best, but
Mhm.
um and I did all the things. I led worship. I was on the leadership. I led Bible studies. I trained Bible study leaders. I was on the track, with university to. It really felt like we were on like the front lines of, I don't know, the war for the soul of America or something like that. And
Mhm.
but that only lasted a couple of years before I started deconstructing, and the questions that were being raised in my classes. Whether they were science classes or literature classes or, they had a humanities sequence where we had to read the whole Bible. And I think that was the first time I read like most of the Bible, like, in one go. Yeah.
Mhm.
And that there's nothing like reading the Bible to kind of screw up your notions of faith and the assumptions you have about what Christianity is or isn't.
Mhm. Mhm. And then you continued your education. You went to get a graduate degree, and then after that, you entered the workforce looking for a teaching position. So,
Yeah.
so what you initially had this perspective of I'm going to be a light in the darkness.
Yeah.
I'm gonna, um, You're not gonna hide it under a bushel and all of those things.
Yeah.
Um, but
Oh, it hurts to
then
think about, but yes.
uh, but what brought you? What put an opportunity like the one at? And I'll follow your lead, whether you want to say
Yeah, it's
EVU
APU.
or APU.
Azusa Pacific University in Southern California. Well, the that sort of haughty, I'm gonna say I'm saving the world vibe was quickly replaced by I just don't wanna be I don't wanna be a dick. I don't wanna I wanna be the good Christian. I don't wanna be like
Mhm.
these angry, conservative fundamentalists, I'm the relatable guy, I'm not your typical Christian. It quickly became this sort of like sales thing, like PR thing to say, "Yeah, I know what you see in the media," and this is like the '90s, right? It's like, "I know what you see, with Newt Gingrich and uh, all these politicians and pundits and pastors seem so angry and hateful. That's not me. Hey, I'm a cool Christian. I'll go out and have a beer with my classmates and
Yeah, yeah,
represent. Relational friendship evangelism. What was it called?
yeah. It's
Something
something
like
like
that.
that. Something
So
like that.
yeah, it was. Let's just take that down a notch, and then those notches just kept going down to zero.
Hmm.
So by the time I got hired, I was teaching at community college, and I got hired to teach at Azusa um, about a year into my teaching experience, and I didn't think I would stay, but I knew how to speak evangelicalese, and I didn't. Yeah, I figured I'd teach there for a couple of years, get the experience, move on to something else.
Hmm.
But yeah, I felt like I understood those students because even though we were at a Christian setting, I felt like I saw a lot of myself in those kids who had questions and who had very very little understanding of how the world worked. That this world that I had just been in. I lived in San Francisco for 4 years, went to San Diego for 5. I was on the 5-year plan. So yeah, that's by the time I got there, I was like barely hanging on. I didn't like it. I didn't like including myself under the umbrella of Christianity because I was just so embarrassed by so many things that were, this beginning of Bush was just about to happen, W. Bush,
Hmm.
and the rise of the Tea Party and all these things were just about to start happening, and I was already horrified by the Iraq War and things like that. So it was just yeah.
Yeah,
But I hoped
yeah.
that being there would help me with my faith. It still meant a lot to me because it was my whole life, and it's
Right,
terrifying when
right.
you get to this precipice, right, where you get to this point where, oh shit, I don't know what I believe anymore. And so I think the tendency is to cling a little bit harder and to dig a little deeper to try and salvage something. Did I just waste the first 30 years of my life being this? No, no, I'm gonna keep digging and interrogating the faith and learning more. Um,
Hmm.
and then that just kind of accelerated the deconstruction as it turned out. So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. And you sort of alluded to this in the book. You started in '98. You around
yeah,
that time is when you first uh when you first came on to camp, visited campus and started. Um, and I started my undergrad at Indiana Wesleyan in the fall of 2001. So
right.
my first full week of college was when
Yeah,
9/11
ooh,
happened.
yeah,
So
something
I
happened.
am yes. So I am curious, like, what was the political mood like, sort of before and after that period? Because that is like, now, yes, now it's 20 years ago. It's wild to think it
Yeah,
was 20 years ago, but but that was definitely a watershed moment of before and after. And I think especially on in an environment like an evangelical Christian college, a lot of shit changed
it
really
did.
fast.
It
So I'm
did.
curious. I'm curious. During those early years, as you were seeing the first Bush campaign, followed by followed by the 9/11 attack, followed by the American response to
Right.
what sort of shifted there
Yeah.
on
So in
campus.
'98, it was still a really innocent time. I mean, there's no internet, um, and things were good. Love or hate Clinton, his 8 years, the things were good here. It wasn't great in other places. But so when Bush won in a surprise in 2000, well, let me back up. In '98, it's still like the Christians are still like friendly. The Christians are still, um, welcoming. Like I walked onto campus and everyone's saying hi to me, and like I'm this 28-year-old in a shirt and tie, looking super awkward, I'm sure. And these groups of students will walk by and say hi, and I was like, "Are you talking to me?" Like I'm not used to like just having strangers say hi to me on a big campus. I went to I went to two big schools, and so yeah, it was an innocent time. If if I brought up like abortion or something, I'm sure it would get heated. But like overall, the vibe that Christians had in the '90s was still kind of like we're the values, people. We love. We're spreading Jesus's love. So when Bush gets elected, it's like, all right, well, that was weird. He lost the general election, won on the technicality of the electoral college. All right.
Mm.
And then, that first year of 2000, not a lot happened. He went to his ranch. Um, he was like an absentee president because not a lot was going on. And then bam, 9/11 happens. And suddenly he's a war president. And the culture that shifted was now it's like, oh, now we hate brown people. We don't, there were people going around shooting, Latinos and Hispanics because they thought they were, Middle Eastern, and so it was like the first step of this sort of reclaiming whiteness that I think Obama finished off in 2008. It was like 9/11 was the license to suddenly like, "I wanna nuke the entire Middle East," is what I would often hear my students say. Or let's, just carpet bomb the whole place. I think it was Ann Coulter that said, "We should just nuke the whole entire Middle East, and whoever's survives will convert to Christianity, and then the world will be fine." That was kinda like the vibe of evangelical Christianity, post
Mhm.
9/11. It went from family values and loving people to uh let's get revenge and let's kill a lot of people, and um yeah, the hoods came off. I remember in your episode in Chapel Probation, you had mentioned that shift and the following years was part
Mhm.
of what you were trying to distance your own self from while you
Yeah.
were a college student.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that was a part of my deconstruction was like I for me, it was this it was this really stark divide between my history classes, the ones that were in the history department, from, someone a professor who I could now identify as like more of a Christian Reconstructionist type person, um, versus what I was learning in like Bible classes and things like that. And like, it's supposed to be serving this person we call the Prince of Peace, and like people are clamoring for war, and that doesn't sit right. So
Yeah.
it was definitely for me as a student, it was definitely one of the things that was very, very, very uh significant in like my own political and social shift away from like the sort of default republicanism that I think is the sort of inheritance of anybody born after the 1970s in in
Yeah.
evangelicalism, uh, by and large. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
I like I definitely like that the way you called out the sort of political vibe and how it affected faculty in the book. There's this I'm going to quote from it. It says, "There was a strange vibe in this evangelical school, perhaps not unlike many others. faculty members generally did not let others know their political leanings. It was just too dangerous for either side. And I'd love for you to share a little bit more about that. And I'm curious, was that something that was uniform sort of across departments, or was this something where like you as sort of a English department at my school was sort of considered a more threatening one than some other
Yeah, because they're
threatening to the
liberal.
status quo. Yes, yes,
Liberal, I'm putting in quotes. Yeah.
yes,
Um,
yes.
yeah. I mean, there were departments that were unilaterally conservative fundamentalists, and they were loud and proud Republicans. Why is it always a history department? It's always like, yeah, they were very political, but most of the departments that were trying to be academic had to toe this line of we're top notch scholars and educators in this ivory tower, so that doesn't jive well with fundamentalism. So there's that recognition, but you can't be anti-fundamentalism because then that gets you in trouble culturally. So professors at these schools that are trying to be real schools, that are trying to be, they're accredited, they have,
Hmm.
they
Hmm.
offer all these degrees, including some graduate degrees. They're trying to play this game of, we're an evangelical alternative to, a big state school or a boutique, liberal arts college. But it's really impossible to do that, as they have found. Azusa is not doing well. So yeah, so the English department especially was fascinating because we had enough respect for each other as scholars to not heavily identify with the hardcore fundamentalists, and there were enough people that had degrees from real schools, doctorates. I didn't, but that they would not risk one of two things. They if they if so like with the Iraq war, if they came out against the Iraq war, they risked being exposed as a liberal, which is a no-go in this community.
Hmm.
But if they are pro-war, then they risk being seen as a fundamentalist who doesn't pay attention to history and culture and academics. And so my department, we were very respectful of each other, and we really, unless you're just one or two of us are talking, as a group, avoided politics as much as we could. Um, and I got that sense from colleagues in other departments as well. It's just because you're going to be in trouble with someone, but if you reveal who you voted for or where you side on gay marriage or abortion or something like that, it's just you only have things to lose. There's nothing to gain in this culture because you're going to get dinged for one or the other, for not being academic enough, for not being intellectual enough, or not being conservative fundamentalist enough. And so that was the tension that I saw throughout the campus. Like I said, other than the few departments that were just hardcore fundamentalists and loud and proud about it.
Yeah. Did you go into teaching sort of aware of how your classes would be constricted and that tension between those things of, not wanting to be too fundamentalist, not wanting to be too liberal, not like having to toe this very specific line? Like when did that become apparent to you as someone that like you have this charge to teach something,
Yeah.
but then you also have this other other thing going
Yeah.
that is imposing upon it all.
Yeah. Well, I was aware of it when I got there, but I didn't know. I didn't. I believed the school when they said they believed in academic freedom and that they're an accredited school and they're top notch educational institution. I stupidly believed them when they said that, and I got in trouble immediately for the next 15 years. Every semester because they don't mean that. They want the impression to the public to be we're this top notch educational blah blah blah, but really it was just Sunday school, with some interesting things you can learn and a degree you can get. So Yeah,
Hmm.
and I write in the book, and I tried to use the F word to teach parts of speech because it worked really well at community college. You know, you fuck can be a noun, it can be a verb. You can modify it to
Yeah.
be adverb or adjective, and that worked beautifully at community college. And when I encountered students who didn't know what an adjective was, I thought, oh, I'll do this, and I was almost fired in my like third week of teaching because students did not appreciate the pedagogy of using a profane word to teach grammar, and their parents didn't either because they called
Mm,
the school. So it was that kind of thing, like you just, no bad words, Oh, okay. I mean, I knew it would be, tricky, or it would be. I thought it was gonna be a gray area, and it was not a
right,
gray
right,
area. It
right.
was black and white, and I stepped in it. I just, um, yeah. And then even just talking about things like racism, students hated that. They're like, "Why are you bringing this up? You're just dividing people. You're not having grace for the racists. You're not. It's just like, oh, okay, I see. You know,
Hmm.
that's what I was up against.
Yeah. And so much of your book is really rooted in the classroom experience itself. A lot. So you share so many anecdotes about what happened in the classroom that are really, I think, very illustrative of how evangelicalism really deeply affects people's thinking.
Yeah,
What were some of your favorite ways to introduce thought provoking questions
yeah,
for your students that they may not have gotten elsewhere? Because I was certainly in classes that felt more like a Sunday school class at my college sometimes. Like not it wasn't uniform. There were some classes that were hard as hell,
yeah,
but it all
yeah,
depended on it all depended on the instructor.
yeah.
Like
Totally.
one if an instructor wanted to phone it in, if they put a Christian glaze on something,
Yeah,
then they could phone it in.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And by phoning it in, it's like scholastically or academically, because they were definitely like there was definitely a vibe of professors trying to be like pastors.
Right, right, right. Because
So
in
yeah,
like in the religion department, there may be teaching people how to be pastors.
yeah. But I mean, I'm talking about math teachers, and uh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I would eavesdrop on as I walk past classrooms, or sometimes just sit outside of open doors between classes, and I was like, wow, it's it's yeah, a lot, yeah, like you said, it depended on the professor. But in my class, I tried to the things that made my class so fascinating was because I was a journalist before I did this. Um, I learned how to create a safe space for people to just share whatever they were thinking without fear of repercussion. And
Mhm.
so, and I didn't do that as a way to deceive them or trick them into saying something, but I really wanted to create a space where anyone could share what they were thinking about it and have it put to the test in an academic setting. Um, and I learned a lot just from hearing my students' perspectives because I knew if I came in as like I'm Mr. Liberal and I hate conservatives, they weren't going to talk.
Sure.
They
Yeah.
weren't going to share unless they were, there were some brave souls that wanted to fight me. But that's the last thing I wanted. I wanted a safe space where look, I care about you. I care about your learning. I have some perspectives, and I want you to share your life, your experiences, your thoughts. And so, for
Mhm.
better and for worse, that made for amazing classes because students felt safe to just say whatever the hell they wanted. And
Right,
my
right,
God,
right.
did they say some shit that just jaw-droppingly bizarre, hateful, just ignorant stuff. And so I see it. I didn't write this in the book, but I really see it as a credit to professors like me who can create a space where students are willing to just let it fly. Because where else are they going to get an opportunity to test out their most innermost thoughts to to see how it lands in a community setting, that and to have pushback. I saw pushback not as a punishment, but as an opportunity to learn and grow. Some of my favorite moments when I was a college student was when I would write something or, if I did participate in class, um, have the professor, you know, say, "Well, here's why that doesn't work," or here's more to this than what you're understanding. Yes, and here's where that fits in the sphere of thoughts, on these various spectrums, here, this is where you're landing. And so, yeah, students said ridiculously racist things, sexist things, homophobic things, and I would just be very blunt and say, this is how that lands. If I'm not white, this is how that sounds, or if I'm not straight, this is how that sounds.
Hmm.
Is this what you really mean? To give students an opportunity to come back from that, to say, oh gosh, that does sound hateful when you put it in that context. That's outside of my own understanding. So yeah, there's, and the great thing about I tried to do in the book was I tried to show that, there were some horrible stories, but there were some really great stories of students who did take the opportunity to reflect and to sort of grow their thoughts and in many cases change uh, their thoughts, their way of thinking to be more inclusive, to be more caring about, people that weren't like
Right.
them.
Right. Yeah, you share some anecdotes of like, white male students that you gave them an environment where, yeah, they'd said some things that are not rightfully not well received anymore.
Yeah,
Um uh but you provided an environment that allowed them to explore it and see the problems with what they were with those things. And then that led and they valued the fact that you pressed them, which a lot of times I think one of the issues with these schools is that the students and especially the parents, grandparents, trustees,
yeah,
donors
yeah,
think that this is a that there's all this talk about the thing that cracks me up uh,
yeah.
about the sort of current culture war is that they use this language of indoctrination
Right.
with with public schooling.
Yeah,
Um, but that's what's happening. That's their goal in a place like this. But you are providing a place where they can think through the implications of what they're saying, which is really valuable for a young person because a young person is someone that can't people can change at any point in their life, but
yeah,
especially at that period, that's one of the best environments to make those choices and changes.
yeah. And there were a lot of students that just refused. They
Hmm.
I hear what you're saying, but no, I'm just gonna stick with what I got, and you know,
I I think
it was
the most disheartening one from that most striking example was the young man who said that his father dying of cancer because he
uh,
couldn't get insurance coverage for
yeah,
the good treatment was good because of freedom.
yeah, yeah. This was I mean, that was one of those tragic things where the kid knew what he had to say to be a good conservative. His father died. He said something like, "I would rather have freedom than, you know, socialism in medicine, and have my father get this chance to be saved." But he clearly didn't mean it. That's that's a horrible. Well, first of all, it's a horrible choice to have to make. That's
You're
what
right.
capitalism does to us. Is we have to measure a person's life against how much money it costs to help them. And
Hmm.
so yeah, he was trying to put a brave face on it and say, and we were all crying at that in that story. The whole class, had well, I wouldn't say the whole class. A lot of Christians have no feelings. And that was chilling to see, half the class, 2/3 of the class is teary, and a third of the class is just sitting there like looking bored and stoic. Like, wow, really? This doesn't move you? This kid's talking about his father passed away in the last year. And hmm. But yeah, he was trying
Right.
to be brave and say, yeah, I would rather have freedom, and capitalism than my father, is what he was trying to say. And it's
Do you,
clearly not what he meant. Yeah.
mhm. On that comment about some Christians not showing any feeling, do you think that is tied to their sort of their sense of certainty around things, that this is just the way things are, um, and that like that sort of that this type of teaching sort of deaden you to injustices?
Yeah.
Is that where you think that's at the root of that,
Yeah. And
or
I
is it
think,
something else?
no, I think, yeah, yeah, I don't know for sure, but my sense is, being in the classroom for 15 years, is that you're right. It's the certainty, because students would get annoyed with me if I brought in like a news story that had something sad, children dying
Mm,
in war, or famine, or disease. And, they would, I think they saw it, and I'm trying to give them the benefit of the doubt. I think they saw it as like a lack of faith. If you're going to get all weepy about this horrible thing, then you don't have faith in God that He's in control. And some would even be able to say it that way. Like, I believe God's in control, and so we need to have faith in that and confidence in that. Um, which opens up a huge theological can of worms, right? As to, like, then, how do you explain good people suffering? And so
mhm,
the students, when you're 18 or 19, you just think, well, if something bad happened to them, because these are kids coming from wealthy families by and large, I think their lives are great. Mom and dad dropped them off, in a nice Mercedes, and, they're from wealthy neighborhoods, they went to private schools, a lot of them. What's the worst thing that happens to them? NSYNC broke up, s- s- yeah, the cafeteria food wasn't great that day. These are kids that the length of human suffering out there just does not compute in their heads. And so you bring up a news story, and they're just like, ugh, whatever. So they must have deserved it, was kind of the vibe. They did something, because it's biblical, right? If you piss off God, he kind of screws you up. He kind of punishes. And so I think in their minds, it's both the simplicity of that theology, of it's kind of a prosperity gospel theology, and the feeling that I have to be absolutely certain and confident that God is in control. Um, so if you can crack that, man, you see a lot of deconstructing, like, right in that moment. It's just like, oh crap,
mhm,
what if that's not the case? Then, because if it's not the case, then I got some serious introspection to do, because my faith just doesn't add up.
mhm. Yeah. Um, we're gonna take a break, and then we're gonna come back and go a different direction. And this is
Oh,
just a little.
left turn. Okay.
First Corinthians warned you about the women with a loud mouth, and this podcast is just that. Here at the Speaking in Church podcast, we talk all about the regular people and the things that regularly happen to them in the evangelical church. It's a podcast about change, it's a podcast about seeking moral high ground, and it's a podcast for people who are just trying to deconstruct on the safe side. You can listen wherever you get your podcast, and if you want to be a guest, yes, you, regular person, you can be a guest on the Speaking in Church podcast. If you want to come on, just let us know.
I wanna highlight another major part of your book, which is that you write a lot about many of the prevalence of whiteness in these spaces, and the ways in which you struggled against it, and also sought to make space for other BIPOC students and staff. And that is a through line through the entire book. Your book opens with the statement that your your experience is dictated by the way you're perceived as a Japanese American man. Um, so I want to just let this sort of be. I want it to be an open sort of question as far as where where you want to take this in this section. Um, but let's. How did it show up in your classrooms? You've already mentioned that your students would say racist things, whether they were ignorant or not,
Yeah.
in the classroom. But then how did this prevalence and preference for whiteness also impact outside of the classroom?
Oh, okay. Well, in America in general, but especially in evangelical spaces, whiteness is not necessarily a preference as so much as it's just the default, right?
Right. Yes. Yeah.
That's just anything outside of that is, you deal with it. You welcome it, you crusade against it, you have to figure out what to do with it. And so in most of my colleagues and students' minds, they had their assumptions about what an Asian American man is supposed to be. And I did not fit any of them, I think. And that it was terrifying for them that to that I didn't speak the way they expected me to. I didn't think the way they expected me to. Um and I wasn't like a rabble rouser in the sense that, I wasn't like yelling and carrying on in meetings, but I had thoughts, I had opinions, I had questions, and I had a sense of humor that didn't really land in those spaces. I would say something in a meeting and one person's cracking up and the rest of the room just glaring at me like, "What did you just say?" It's like, "Oh, okay, sorry." Um, and so I wanted the book to be partly, this is what it was like to teach at the school, but also, I learned a lot about myself, with the school and the evangelical culture as a foil to say, well, I clearly don't fit, and I have a choice. I can cater to the white gaze and the white expectations of what I'm supposed to be and fit in and succeed and, have a great career possibly as a as an educator at this school. Um, or I could really like dig into who I was and because embarrassingly when I started there, I didn't have a great sense of self. I had learned how to operate in white spaces, and that that was a skill I had acquired through growing up as like one of the only non-white kids in my school district to and even doing university, like we learned about diversity issues and diversity is always just this idea that it's a white space, but we're welcoming of all these different types of people. You're probably not going to be the head or the head pastor, um, but yeah, you're welcome here, and we'll figure out what to do with you. I kind of broke through a ceiling. I think I was the first minority worship leader they had at that chapter ever. For
Hmm.
however long they weren't hadn't been going for that long, but anyway, still, I was the first. Um, so yeah, at APU, it was like I it was so clear to me that because of the contrast of culture, and I was becoming involved in this sort of art space in Los Angeles called the Tuesday Night Cafe, which is a predominantly Asian American but kind of intersectional art space. And seeing people who lived just authentically as themselves without worrying about what white culture thought of them or how it perceived them was a revelation to me. And so I brought that vibe to my work, and wow, that didn't fly. It was like, how dare you have agency and pride in, in who you are. You're supposed to be trying to achieve whiteness, like all the other good BIPOC folks who are getting in line. And so, um, yeah, it was hard, but it was also kind of fun. Just once I just made my decision, it was just like, well, this is who I'm gonna be. This is who I want to be, and they can take it or leave it. I still thought I would work there for a lot longer, but yeah, a lot of things happened, and
Hmm.
uh, I was shown the door eventually after 15. I made it 15 years. That's kind of a miracle in it of itself as I look back.
Hmm. What? How did those communities? I'd love to. You already said like you already mentioned how the Tuesday night cafe helped you sort of explore and express different parts of your identity, and that was also very interesting to me reading the book. Just this aspect of community and where you sort of sought it both within the confines of APU, but then these other spaces too. Um, and like then you also were a part of a number of different student associations. Um, did you you did comment that you sort of brought the confidence and everything that you developed at the cafe to your work.
Yeah.
Um, how did um those different communities and groups, um sometimes it seemed like they intersected, but sometimes it felt like you had to keep them separate.
Yeah.
Like what was that dynamic like while you were, in this space where the faculty are sort of, um they're sort of under the microscope all the time too.
Mm,
Like uh you know, um definitely the student population is, like
yeah.
you mentioned like the like the you know the the narcs they would send like to bust parties and stuff.
Yeah.
Like um
Yeah.
like my school did that too, and
Yeah.
they would, and sometimes they would go like 30-40 mile radius
Oh
shift,
man.
I mean, it wasn't, I was in small town Indiana, but then like there's Kokomo, there's Indianapolis, there's Noblesville, there's there's all these other places where you could go to, sneak a drink or whatever if you
Mm, yeah.
but anyways, that's just a digression.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
So the students who go to APU, the BIPOC students, they're a tough crowd. They, c- some of our friends say, women are the foot soldiers of the patriarchy. Well, BIPOC evangelicals can be the foot soldiers of white supremacy, because like kind of like how I was growing up, I had bought into this idea that I could not be my authentic self, so I had to learn how to thrive in white spaces. And so by the time a kid's 18, let's say they're Asian and they're applying to college and they want to go to APU or one of the evangelical schools, they're pretty set in what their mission is. They're not going there to read about Yuri Kochiyama or Grace Lee Boggs and really interrogate their identity as Asian Americans. They're going there to prove to themselves that they can make it in white spaces. And me being there kind of it ruins that. The because I'm, like, holding up a mirror, but this is who you are, and so what does that mean? And they're thinking, "No, that's not why I came here. I have white friends, you know, I'm succeeding, so stop showing me how I'm different than everyone because I'm going to achieve this thing where I'm the same as them." Little do they know is they'll never be accepted completely as anything other than, a token or, one of the good ones, quote unquote. Because if they really leaned into who they were as Mexican American, as Indian American, as African American, you know, it wouldn't fit, and they would be seen as weird and suspect. So it was really tough for me to try and bring them into. So there was this program called the multi-ethnic programs, which is now defunct. And they had a Latino club, they had a black club, they had Asian. I helped start the Asian club because they didn't have one before I got there. Um, but it was really hard to get people to the Asian club because I think the Asians are the worst in these in these situations because they're like they buy into the model minority myth, and I don't know if I don't have we probably don't have time to go into that whole thing, but it's a pretty shitty thing that the U.S. government foisted upon Asians to call the Asians the good minorities and kind of weaponize that against other minorities in America. So kids who come to APU are there aren't many black kids, and that's good because they have such a hard time. The black club, I think it was called BSA, was probably the most political of all the ethnic orgs. Because they just every day, we talk about microaggressions. They just got aggressions, macro aggressions, just for the color of their skin. Whether it was the campus safety folks harassing them or professors calling them out to represent their entire people group, or just stupid things said in the dorms. Um, the BSA was sort of like a haven for black students. So it was the good thing was around 2009, 10, all the stars aligned and the ethnic org, and because what happened? Obama, 2008.
Mhm.
Obama was the next level of, okay, we're gonna really pull off the hoods, like the it was like a license for all the kids, all the non-black kids, not just white kids, to be anti-black and to say the N-word and to tell black jokes. Um, it was so ugly, and that caused a few things to happen on campus, some occurrences that had to do with swastikas and
Jeez.
just all kinds of things that forced the campus to sort of have a reckoning. But what it did was it united the ethnic orgs, the Asian Club, there was a new group called LASA, Latin American Student Association, and the Black Student Association, all kind of banded together for like a glorious 2 years before the school finally crushed them and they all graduated. And but yeah, there was like a mini revolution for just a little bit where people were like, they can't pretend like things are okay anymore because there's swastikas being drawn on cars. Um, we
Mhm.
have to confront this and we have to unite. Then after that, it kind of went back to the way it was because with student orgs, you're just a semester or two away from extinction because kids come in, kids graduate. There's just constant
Right.
flow of students coming in and out. So it's really hard to establish something that's like long standing in these spaces. And the schools know that. So they just they let the revolution happen and then it died out and then went back to business as usual.
Yeah. Yeah. I can imagine that just waiting out the clock is a very effective strategy in a place like
Yeah.
APU and
The
like
the school was
similar colleges.
they were kind of genius because what they did was they had the beloved president. Anytime something bad went down, like after the swastikas, they would have a town hall and the president would go and sit in front of, like 500 kids, and there would be an open mic and the kids could just let him have it. Like, my professors are racist, my classmates are racist, and the president would sit there, look sad and say, I'm so sorry, this is terrible, we're gonna fix this. And they wouldn't do anything. But the
Mhm.
students felt heard and they felt like they were being taken seriously. But they just were just waiting out the clock. They weren't actually gonna do anything. And they did almost nothing unless they were forced to. Um so yeah, it was heartbreaking.
Yeah. In addition to all the racial politics of everything, there was also the added uh, sexual politics that
Yeah.
happened, and you eventually became more strident and public in your support of the LGBTQ student population. That you know uh, that these are not certainly not affirming places for
No.
people within that population, and that eventually led that in addition to all these other compounding things was part of what led to your decision to leave. Um, how
Yeah.
did those? How did were there intersections? Because like those are very different. They're all sort of both of these types of associations because of because of what they are. You're sort of in opposition to administrative things, administrative attempts to maintain this very particular um, what was the language you used? You know, no division, like, Christian
Yeah.
unity, that all
Yeah.
that sort of stuff that always favors the
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 majority
status quo
culture. Yeah.
and the
Yeah.
majority culture. Um, all of these things, you're in it
Yeah.
as faculty.
Yeah.
How did that weigh on you? I mean,
Yeah. From day one, I would let it like slip that I was maybe not affirming, but that I was supportive of my LGBTQ students.
mhm.
Um,
Oh, and I guess,
without
and I know that this is an insider show, but affirming means,
oh, right.
within the language of evangelicalism means that
Yeah.
you're okay with gay and queer people doing things within the church, and they're cool with God too.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's beautifully put. And um, because yeah, it's not like uh secular society is super great with, queerness either, um,
Sure, right.
but yeah, so I would let it slip because my time in San Francisco as a young mid-20s grad student was transformative to be in writing communities with, trans people in the 90s, with gay and lesbian people, um, really, really made me question everything I had been taught about Christianity and the views of queerness to the
Mhm.
point where, I got to APU and I was just like, at the time I was just like, I don't think it matters, if you're gay or if you're trans. And um that eventually just became more and more affirming where not only is it okay, but it's great. It's who these people are. It's just like anything. So I could live in this like in the shadows of the school where I had this quiet space where students would, come talk to me. And how sad is that the only person they could find to talk to was this cishet dude, like that taught English. Um,
Mhm.
but I had so many conversations with students who, and in their minds they were struggling, quote unquote, struggling with their sexuality. Um, trying to get to a place where either they could pray it away or, that was the perspective most of them had. And here I was just saying, just go with it. Like it's what
Right,
if what
right.
what if it's not bad that this is who you are? What if it's awesome that this is who you are?
Mhm.
Um, so I had a quiet little space, but then I got elected to be the chapel speaker one year. And stupid me went in there and like said nice things about gay people and my friends. And I had this whole message about seeing the world as a Christian, even though I wasn't a Christian, through a poet's eye, to see the whole world and all its complexity and its beauty and its horrors and its um and and I included, the gay community. 'Cause at the time there was no trans discussions. It was just straight or gay. So I talked
Mhm.
about how, I think it's totally Christian to wish for abundance for our gay friends. And that was yeah, that was it was a wonderful thing for most of the students to hear. It was a terrible thing to say at Azusa Pacific University because it put me on more on the radar and on the list as a bad professor. So yeah, after that, then the students started organizing. They formed this sort of underground club. They wanted me to be involved, and I knew if I did that, it was kind of game over. It was like now I'm fully involved in an organization on campus that's illegal. That all it was just a discussion group to just talk about how people were feeling and talk about resources to support them. But yeah, that ended up being my undoing, and eventually I was demoted from full time, and then I was gonna be fired, but, I talked my way back into the job and then I quit. And thus, ended my time at Azusa Pacific University. But what a ride.
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, the thing about I think you made a somewhat self-deprecating comment about yourself, that like you being a cishet person, but being a person that someone could talk to. Um, I do want to share. Like, I actually talked to someone years ago that went to my same school, um, 10, 15 years before I did, and this person is gay, and
Mm,
I and they were not out when they were at Indiana Wesleyan, but the the fact of the matter is that there was a teacher that was still there when I went there, and that person was in a similar department. And I'm gonna be vague because
yeah, yeah.
I know they're retired
Okay.
at this point, but nonetheless, it was the same type of person, same type of professor that made at least that small moment of comfort for them. So don't sell that short. Because that I'm sure that was,
Yeah.
uh uh you know uh you know just a glass of water in hell type thing.
Yeah, no, no, thank
you
you.
know
And I didn't mean to, like, 'cause yeah.
I understood what you said, but
Yeah,
at
yeah.
the same.
It was an I felt like it was an honor to bear witness to these kids,
Mhm.
quote unquote struggles, because they're at such a tough place, because in their minds, their salvation's in the balance of how they handle this issue of their identity. And the
Right,
fact that
right.
they could talk to me about it, um, was it made all the shit I put up with worth it, to be there to bear witness to their story, to say to be a listening ear. There were tears. Um, yeah, I slept good at night, even though it was rough and I had put up with a lot of stuff. Um, yeah, those moments were really special to me. And I said, how sad it is that had to talk to me, because at a normal school there's resources. There's official school resources for these kids to talk to someone, to a counselor,
Right, right, right.
or LGBT faculty that they could talk to, right? But like in these Christian spaces, you really have to be careful, and you have to sort of suss out who's safe to talk to. And the fact that they would find me to be safe to talk to, um, felt felt really, really great, because I felt like I was doing something right. um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Were those moments the reasons why you stayed, even
yeah,
though, you were in such a different place in your own
yeah,
understanding of, like, you weren't practicing this faith anymore, but
right.
you.
Yeah, it was a big part of it for the BIPOC kids who are figuring it out. As a teacher of any level, I've taught from elementary all the way up to college. You live for that light bulb moment where like, oh, I get it. And so I loved that in the classroom. I was teaching English. It's 99% of what I did was teaching English. It's just the faith integration part. Okay, 90%. 10% was like this faith integration where you help these students see how their faith interacts with what you're teaching. And that was easy
Mhm.
with English. I felt like I did a better job when I decided I wasn't Christian anymore than I did when I was a Christian, because it was just clearer to me. Here's the teachings of Jesus, and here's how they line up with, the political landscape of America, or the history of America. And
Mhm.
man, there's some really tough conversations to be had there. So when we're reading literature or we're writing arguments, it was just super easy. And I never tried to proselytize them away from their faith. I was just trying to point them to, well, what does the Bible say? And what do you think that means when Jesus says this, as to what we're talking about? Um, and it was partly the classroom experience of helping Christian kids see the world a little clearer. But yeah, for sure, being the LGBT club and the Asian club definitely were the other draw. I think it was if I didn't have one of those 3 things, I would have left
Hmm.
a lot sooner, but because I had, deep ties and roots in these 3 communities, it just kept me there. And that
Okay.
everyone always asks, "Why in the hell did you stay as long as you did?" And even when I was there, people would be like, "Why are you even," but I would tell them that that's why. I feel like I was in a good place to help people, and to teach English, to do my job, but also to, help a small group of Christians, be better. Not just in Christianity, but just people, because I did that in community college too, that wasn't Christian. I really felt like teaching English was a way to help society be better, to
Yeah.
be thoughtful, to be critical of things. Not and I don't mean just critical, but to be able to critique the things that are being fed to you through media, through culture, through all the things. So
Hmm.
I stayed, and I don't regret it. I regret things that have happened, and I regret how it ended, but that wasn't really up to me. So it's hopefully it makes for an interesting book anyway, all these years
Yeah.
later.
It definitely did. It definitely did. It's a very interesting book. And I mean even though we've touched on a lot of different topics and things, we really just scratched the surface of what you talk about in the book, because I mean there's so many great anecdotes about whether it's in the classroom or in some of these different groups or clubs that you were a part of, and even the way you explored friendships and communities sort of off campus and all of these things.
Yeah,
It's a
there's
really
rock stars and
yeah.
Gilmore Girl.
That's right.
um,
Yes. Yes. My wife is a huge Gilmore Girls fan. So,
ah,
and so I've watched a lot sort of by osmosis,
yeah, no, I have two. I
you
think
know.
I've seen most of half of the episodes.
Exactly. Um what do you what do you think, my sort of last question for you, and I think you'll have a very interesting take on this, uh is what do you think has changed. This is another two-part question, so I'm sorry.
Okay,
But what do you think has changed in places like APU and in the years since you've left? And what do you think hasn't changed? And even if it whether it's on campus or, how the campus and how these places are perceived, wherever you want to take that question.
okay, yeah. Well, luckily you and I are friends with Josie Jimenez, who
Hmm.
does the Speaking in Church podcast,
That's
and
right. Yep.
she arrived at APU the semester after I left. And so she was there for the next 4 years, through the Trump, election and all that. And is the closest thing I have to someone on the most of my colleagues stopped talking to me after I left. Um, and a few stayed in touch, but I tried not to talk about, the school with them because I knew it was awkward. So hearing from Josie and other people that have been there since, um, yeah, it was a confusing time because the school tried to um step up and support its LGBTQ students, only to be smacked down by the local churches and politicians, and then they rescinded that, and then they put it back, and they took it, they had a prohibition against same-sex relationships that that kept going in and out of the student handbook all within a couple of years. I actually don't
Hmm.
even know where they landed. It kind of doesn't matter because they really just sort of dropped the ball and just said, "Whatever, let's just do what we've been doing." Um, and the other weird thing that happened when I got there in '98, it was 88% white. This is Southern California. I just heard on another podcast, a current professor said the school now, because white folks stopped going, it's 56% Hispanic now, which
Oh wow,
blows my
that's huge.
mind. Yeah, because what well, I don't wanna get into all the demographic shifts, but, So it's a different campus, but by all accounts, it's still just as fundamentalist and still tough to navigate as a BIPOC or queer student. Um, so in that sense, nothing has changed as to the values and the vibe of the school and what's accepted. So, but yeah, every time I think Josie gets sick of it because I'm always asking her. So when you were there, because I have this morbid curiosity. Most of the time, I don't care. But if I'm talking to someone who was there after I left,
Right. Yeah.
I'm morbidly curious. But it just sounded like it was just more of the same. Josie was on my podcast too, and she told some of the stories of the Trump election years and after. So,
Mm.
yeah, it's more of the same. I want to say it got worse. By all accounts. All the progress they made in the 90s and early 2000s to try and be this top-notch educational institution kind of just got dropped. And let's just admit who we are, and we're an evangelical institution first and foremost. And
Mm.
so
Mm.
that's where I have a couple of people on the inside, um,
You got some
who
moles.
I got some moles on the inside. All that means is there's a couple of people that will still talk to me. Um,
Gotcha.
and it's not good. They're on probation with their accrediting board, and they probably won't get out of it unless there's an influx of cash from Koch brothers or one of these billionaire conservative groups.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not. They last year fired 40% of the faculty, just gone. Um, so things aren't
Th-
going well, and so I feel bad. I feel like we're kicking a dying horse. But you know, that's that's where it is. And I'm not going to shed a tear, but I'm not going to jump for joy either if if bad things befall the school.
Yeah, that's that. I mean, I thank you for answering that question. I mean, it, one addition and one thing that's changed is you're talking about your experiences. Uh, you're enabling people through chapel probation and through this book to claim their own stories and share that, which is awesome.
Yeah,
I do have
thanks.
one bonus question, which
Okay.
is, what would I have to do to get my chapel probation award back from Asbury?
All right. I
Because
knew that
they're
was
the
going to
one.
come up. So,
I
okay, I felt horrible doing that, but I just felt like so Blake won. I had a award, quote unquote, for worst chapel or best chapel probation story. And you beat out a tough contender in Brad Onishi. You both had similar situation where you missed pretty much all the chapels and had to make up
Yeah.
for it.
Yep.
The fact that you had to listen to like two cassettes at the same time for over a long amount of time, I gave the award to you. It was a tough call. But then, oh my God, then Asbury, does one of their forced, revivals, that just happened to have been, promoted by Francis Chan and who actually ended up speaking at the end to round out 2 weeks. 2 weeks of chapel. So all those people, if we were there for more than a day, oh my God, can you imagine 2 weeks solid of chapel? That is all the sympathy I had for you sitting there with those tape players vanished when I thought about those poor souls sitting there
Oh yeah.
singing and listening
They
to whatever. And it's like, so I don't know, man. I don't know if you can get that one back.
No, yeah,
Um,
they deserve it. That's fine. They can keep it.
that's big of you to say because I
Yeah,
know how much it
they,
meant to you, and
yeah. I
it's
mean that was a high honor that my
but you,
suffering in the literally almost 20 years ago in the
yeah.
May 2005.
I mean, you can't take it away from you though. That we still
No.
salute you and the suffering that you endured at the hands of chapel programs of Indiana Wesleyan. That's it takes nothing away from your experience. It was horrible. It was just it was inhumane. But that
Oh
Asbury
man.
thing, that was next level. That was the Geneva Convention should cover that. Like that that's like
Extended.
spiritual and psychological warfare on unsuspecting people. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. They deserve it. They deserve it. Well, Scott, thank you so much for talking about your book. Again, the book is Asian American Apostate: Losing Religion and Finding Myself at an Evangelical University. And Chapel Probation can be found wherever you listen to podcasts. Anything else you want to mention before we sign off?
no, I'm really honored to be on for a second time. I think I've said it many times. You started this whole movement a long time ago, and just getting to know you and listening to the work that you do and reading your work is still to this day inspirational and informative. And so, thank you for doing what you do.
Thank you very much for those kind words. I really appreciate it. All right.
1 Corinthians warned you about the women with a loud mouth, and this podcast is just that. Here at the Speaking in Church podcast, we talk all about the regular people and the things that regularly happen to them in the evangelical church. It's a podcast about change, it's a podcast about seeking moral high ground, and it's a podcast for people who are just trying to deconstruct on the safe side. You can listen wherever you get your podcast, and if you want to be a guest, yes, you, regular person, you can be a guest on the Speaking in Church podcast. If you want to come on, just let us know.